Dear friend, pull up a chair and pour yourself some coffee. Maybe something stronger if you have it. This is a story about a man who traveled 1,000 miles on the strength of 52 words about three sisters who held a mountain together with nothing but stubborn love and calloused hands, and about cornbread shared when there was barely enough for one. My grandmother would have called it providence. I reckon she was right. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a man when he has no one left to disappoint. Not the peaceful kind, not the restful kind, the kind that hums behind your teeth like a wire pulled too tight, the kind that fills up all the empty rooms in your chest until there is no space left for hoping. Emmett Calloway knew that silence. He had been raised in it, marinated in it, shaped by it slowly and without mercy the way a river carves a canyon, one grain of sand at a time. He was 27 years old on the June morning he stepped off the westbound train at Thornfield Station, Montana Territory, carrying everything he owned in a single leather valise. The valise had belonged to his mentor, old Mr. Hargrove, the bookbinder, who had taken in a skinny orphan boy and taught him to stitch spines and press covers and find beauty in the weight of a well-made page. Mr. Hargrove had died the previous winter quietly in his sleep, the way good men sometimes do when they have finished their work. He left Emmett the valise a set of bookbinding tools and a note that said simply, "Go find your people, son. They are out there somewhere." The valise was scuffed and scarred, its leather handle worn smooth by decades of hands. Inside it, 3 books, a bone folder, a curved needle and linen thread, 2 clean shirts, a razor, and a letter. The letter was the reason Emmett Calloway was standing on a wooden platform in the middle of nowhere, watching the train shrink to a dark speck against a sky so wide it made his chest ache. 52 words. He had counted them. He had read them so many times the creases in the paper had gone soft as cloth, the ink fading at the folds. Dear Mr. Calloway, we are 3 sisters managing a ranch in the Montana mountains. We need a good, honest man willing to work hard and build a life. If you are not afraid of rough country and plain living, come to Thornfield Station, June the 14th. We will be there. Signed, C. Whitfield. 52 words. He had staked his entire life on them. The station master was a stooped old man with tobacco-stained fingers and a jaw that were constantly chewing on nothing. He squinted at the letter like it might contain a riddle. "Whitfield," he said. He turned the paper over, held it up to the light that was fading. Now the afternoon bleeding into something softer and more golden. Elkhorn Ranch, that would be the Whitfield girls. Girls, Emmett repeated. The old man handed the letter back. 3 of them. Been running that spread alone since their daddy passed. 2 years now, give it your take. He scratched his jaw. Gray stubble rasped against his palm. Good land up there. Sweetwater timber pasture enough for 100 head. But the road up is mean, and those girls do not take kindly to strangers. Something cold moved through Emmett's chest. He looked at the letter again, at the careful handwriting, the precise letters. No flourishes, no decoration. The handwriting of a practical person. Was there anyone supposed to meet me? The station master blinked. Meet you, son. I have not seen anybody from Elkhorn come through here in 3 weeks. Those girls do their supply runs to Crestwood, other direction. He gestured vaguely toward the mountains, their peaks catching the last copper light. Thornfield is just a water stop to them. How far is the ranch? 15 miles, give or take. Northwest up into the high country. He studied Emmett, then this thin young man in his wrinkled city clothes, ink stains on his fingers, wire-rimmed spectacles sitting crooked on his nose. Whatever he saw made him sigh the slow, heavy salt of a man who had watched too many tenderfoots walk into country that would eat them alive. There is a path through Saddleback Canyon, cuts 5 miles off the journey. Follow the creek bed until you see a split rock, looks like a broken tooth, then bear left and climb. Emmett picked up his valise. The leather handle was warm from his grip, familiar as his own pulse. Thank you kindly. The station master's voice stopped him at the edge of the platform. Son, next train comes through Thursday. You could wait here. Send word up to the ranch. Emmett looked at the mountains. They rose against the sky like the spine of some enormous sleeping animal, dark with timber, streaked with the last light. Somewhere up there, 3 women he had never met were going about their evening feeding horses, mending fence, doing whatever it was that mountain people did when the day wound down. They did not know he was coming. Maybe they had forgotten they had even sent the letter. He thought about the old man's note, the last words anyone had ever written just for him. I have done enough waiting, Emmett said. He stepped off the platform onto the packed dirt road. The canyon's swallowed sound hole pressing silence against his ears like cotton wool. Emmett had been walking for nearly an hour, his city boots raising small clouds of red dust with every step the valise growing heavier by the minute. The walls of Saddleback rose on either side, not enormously tall, but steep enough to block the wind and hold the heat of the dying day close against his skin. Sweat ran down his back, soaking through his shirt, plastering the fabric to his spine. He had never been anywhere like this. In Boston, the tallest things were buildings and steeples, brick and mortar reaching upward in orderly rows. Here the rock walls were ancient and indifferent, streaked with iron red and pale gold carved by water and wind into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost like faces watching him pass. The creek bed beside him ran thin and clear over smooth stones, making a sound like someone whispering, just too quietly to hear. He thought about the letter, about what kind of woman writes an advertisement for a husband the way someone might advertise for a hired hand. Three sisters, the station master had said, running a ranch alone. Emmett could not quite picture it. His experience with women was limited to the matrons at the orphanage, stern-faced and efficient, and the few Boston girls who had looked past him without seeing the way people look past a fence post or a lamplight. Something too ordinary to notice. What kind of man answers such a letter? The question had followed him like a shadow ever since he had posted his reply. A lonely man, he supposed. A man with no people of his own. A man who read 52 words from a stranger and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked shut for so long he had forgotten it was there. Hope. That was the word. He had almost forgotten the shape of it. The light was failing fast now, the sky above the canyon rim turning from copper to purple. Emmett quickened his pace. His left boot had developed a blister where the stiff leather rubbed against his heel, and his right shoulder ached from the valise. He shifted it to his other hand, flexed his cramped fingers. That was when he heard the sound. A crack sharp and sudden like a gunshot, but deeper, followed by a low rumble that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. Emmett looked up. For one frozen moment, he saw the canyon wall above him, moving a section of it breaking away from the face like a piece of dry cake, crumbling red rock and gray granite and loose dirt cascading down in a wave of dust and noise. He ran. Instinct took over, the same instinct that had kept him alive in Boston's meaner streets. The instinct that said, move now, do not think, just move. But the rocks were faster. Something struck his left shoulder, spinning him sideways. Something else caught his leg below the knee, a flat slab of stone that slammed him to the ground and pinned him like a hand pressing a moth into a board. The pain was extraordinary. A white-hot wire threading from his ankle to his hip, blotting out everything else. The world narrowed to a single point of agony. He heard himself cry out the sound strange and animal in his own ears. Dust filled his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He coughed, tasted copper and dirt. The rumbling stopped. Silence flooded back, thick and absolute. Emmett lay on his side, his face pressed into the red dust, his left leg buried under stone he could not see. Blood ran from somewhere on his forehead, hot and steady, pooling in the dirt beneath his cheek. His spectacles were gone, knocked away by the impact. The world was a blur of fading color and growing shadow. He tried to move his leg. The pain roared up like a living thing, and he screamed, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls and coming back to him distorted the scream of a man he did not recognize. Nobody knows I am here, he thought. Nobody in the world knows where I am. His vision darkened at the edges. The sky above the canyon rim was turning the color of a bruised purple, and deep blue, the first stars appearing like pinpricks in a curtain. The darkness took him. Briar Whitfield was not supposed to be in the canyon that evening. She was supposed to be at the ranch helping Colleen mend the fence line that a bull elk had taken out the week before. But the yarrow was blooming along the lower creek, thick white clusters nodding in the last light, and their supply of dried herbs was dangerously low after the hard winter. Mama had always said that medicine would not wait for convenience. You gathered when the gathering was good, or you did without. So Briar had taken her canvas sack and her gathering knife and slipped away after supper, following the creek down from the ranch through the thinning pines and into the upper mouth of Saddleback Canyon. The evening air was cooling quickly, carrying the sharp green smell of sage and the softer scent of the yarrow flowers she was pinching from their stems, rolling each cluster between her fingertips to test its readiness before tucking it into the sack. She was humming. One of Mama's songs, the old one about the girl who planted roses on a mountainside and waited for them to bloom. Briar could not remember all the words anymore, only the melody, and even that was fading year by year, worn thin by time the way the creek wore the stones. The sound stopped her, a sharp crack echoing up the canyon, followed by a low rumble that made the stones beneath her feet vibrate. Rock slide. She knew the sound. Anyone who lived in these mountains knew it the way city people knew the sound of a fire bell, with their whole body, every nerve suddenly alert. She waited, listening. The rumble faded. Dust drifted up from the lower canyon, a pale cloud catching the last pink light. No other sound. No voices. No calls for help. Briar almost turned back. The sensible thing was to head home, tell Colleen come back in the morning with ropes and tools. But something held her, a feeling she could not name, a tug at the center of her chest, like a thread being pulled. She followed the creek down. The horse appeared first, a tall bay with a Postal Service brand on its flank standing in the middle of the path, reins dragging in the dust. No rider. Dried foam crusted its neck. Its eyes rolled white when Briar approached, and it shied sideways, stamping. Easy now. Briar caught the reins, ran her hand along the animal's neck. Her fingers came away sticky. In the failing light she could not see the color, but she could feel it warm and thick. Blood. Her stomach dropped. She tied the horse to a scrub oak and followed the trail of disturbed earth around a tumble of boulders. The fresh rockfall was obvious, a raw, pale scar on the canyon wall where the stone had broken away, debris fanning out across the path. And there at the edge of the rubble, a hand. A man's hand, pale and fine-boned, the fingers curled slightly toward the sky. She could see ink stains on the fingertips. Not a rancher's hand, not a miner's hand. The hand of someone who worked with paper and patience. Briar dropped her gathering sack. She scrambled over the rocks, scraping her palms, tearing the hem of her riding skirt on a jagged edge. The man lay on his side, half buried under a flat slab of granite. Young, she saw that first. Not much older than her. A city face, clean, featured beneath the blood and dust. Dark hair matted against his forehead where a gash ran from temple to hairline, still oozing. His clothes were wrong for this country. A white cotton shirt, now filthy, a dark wool vest, Eastern boots that had never touched mountain soil before today. He was breathing. Barely. Shallow, hitching breaths that rattled in his chest. Briar pressed two fingers against his throat. Pulse weak but steady, like a clock running down. She looked at the slab pinning his leg, looked at her own hands, strong but not strong enough. Not for this. She reached into her shirt and pulled out the brass whistle that hung on a cord around her neck. It had been their mother's idea years ago. 3 whistles for 3 girls, 1 blast for come quick, 2 for danger, 3 for emergency. Briar put the whistle to her lips and blew 3 times. The sound split the canyon silence like a knife, sharp and bright, echoing off the walls and racing up toward the ridgeline. Then she knelt beside the stranger and waited. Sage came first. She always did. The youngest Whitfield moved through mountain terrain the way water moves through rock, finding every crack and shortcut, silent and fast. She appeared over the boulder field 12 minutes later, rope coiled over one shoulder, leading their steadiest mule by the bridle. Her amber eyes took in the scene in a single sweep, the rockfall, the buried man, the blood, her sister's set jaw. What happened? She asked, already unwinding the rope. Rock slide. His leg is pinned. I cannot move it alone. Sage knelt beside the slab, tested its weight with both hands, and whistled low. She was small but made of nothing but sinew and mountain air, and even she shook her head. We need Colleen. Colleen arrived 5 minutes later, on horseback, riding hard. The eldest Whitfield swung down from the saddle before her horse had fully stopped, her face carved from the same stone as the canyon walls. She looked at the man, looked at the rubble, looked at her sisters. Who is he? She asked. Briar shook her head. I do not know. I found him like this. Colleen walked around the slab, studying the angles. Her gray-blue eyes missed nothing. The blood on the saddle, the postal horse, the valise that had tumbled free of the slide and lay a few feet away, its clasp broken, a book spilling out onto the red dirt. She looked at the book, then at the man's ink-stained fingers, then at Briar. This is not somebody from around here. No. Could be trouble. Could be dying, Briar said, and her voice held a sharpness that surprised even her. Does it matter who he is right now? Colleen held her sister's gaze for a long moment. Something moved behind those storm gray eyes, calculation, caution, and beneath it, the decency she tried so hard to hide. She nodded once. Sage looped the rope around the far end of that slab, run it through the mule's harness. Briar, keep his head still. If that stone shifts wrong, it could take his leg clean off. They worked in the last fading light, three women who had been moving in concert since childhood, who knew each other's rhythms the way musicians know a song. Sage secured the rope with a knot their father had taught her, tested it twice, positioned the mule. Colleen braced herself against the downhill side of the slab, her boots dug into the loose gravel, ready to guide the stone as it moved. Briar cradled the stranger's head in her lap, her fingers pressed gently against the gash to slow the bleeding. Mugwort leaves already crushed and ready in her apron pocket because she had been gathering herbs, and some habits are older than thought. Sage clicked her tongue. The mule leaned into the harness. The rope went taut. The slab groaned, shifted, scraped sideways across the smaller rocks with a sound like teeth grinding. Colleen threw her weight against it, guiding, and then it was free tumbling to the side with a thud that shook the ground. The man's leg lay exposed, swollen, already darkening to a deep bruised purple from ankle to knee, the fabric of his trouser leg torn. But the bone had not broken through the skin. Briar ran her fingers along the line of it, pressing gently, the way Mama had taught her, feeling for the grinding shift that meant a break. The man groaned but did not wake. Sprained, Briar said. Badly, but not broken. Colleen was already looking at the canyon rim, at the near total darkness closing in around them. We cannot stay here. Another slide could come any time. Briar looked up. There is the old creek cabin, half a mile down. That cabin is a ruin. It has walls and a roof, mostly. Colleen's jaw tightened. She looked at the stranger, unconscious and bleeding in her sister's arms. A city man, an outsider. Every instinct she had, every lesson the frontier had taught her about trust in strangers and men who showed up uninvited, told her to put him on the postal horse and point it toward Crestwood. Let him be someone else's problem. But Briar was looking at her with their mother's eyes, green and deep and certain. And Colleen remembered what Ruth Whitfield used to say at the kitchen table, her hands dusted with flour, her voice as steady as the mountain itself. When you see someone hurting, Colleen, you do not walk past. That is not who the Whitfields are. Fine, Colleen said. Her voice came out harder than she meant it to. The creek cabin. But he stays there. Not the house. Not until we know who he is and what he wants. Getting him onto the mule was a project that required all three of them and most of their remaining strength. Sage, wiry and quick, hooked her arms under his shoulders, while Colleen took his legs, careful of the swollen ankle. Briar guided them, one hand on his head to keep the wound from tearing wider. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight that shifted and sagged with every step. Twice they had to set him down and catch their breath, three women panting in the darkness, while the stranger lay between them, a broken puzzle piece that had fallen into their lives from nowhere. They draped him across the mule's back and walked. The half-mile felt like 10. The creek trail was uneven, studded with roots and stones that caught at their boots in the dark. Sage led the mule. Colleen walked behind, one hand on the man's back to keep him from sliding off. Briar walked ahead with the candle lantern she had lit from the matches in her apron, the small flame throwing wild shadows across the canyon walls. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the mule's steady hooves on stone, the rush of the creek beside them, and somewhere far above, the lonesome call of an owl. The cabin appeared between one step and the next, a dark shape hunched against the hillside, barely visible against the trees. Its door hung crooked on rusted hinges. The single window was dark, the glass long gone. Briar pushed the door open. The smell hit them first. Old wood mouse droppings, something musty and sealed away. Beneath that, the faint char of a fire dead for years, cold ash and creosote. In the candlelight, the cabin revealed itself, a stone fireplace black with soot, a wooden cot with a straw mattress stained and lumpy, a table knocked sideways, an iron pot thick with dust hanging from a hook over the cold hearth. Sage wrinkled her nose. Home sweet home. Get him inside, Colleen said. They laid him on the cot. His skin burned beneath Briar's palm. Fever, already rising fast and hot. The gash on his forehead was still oozing, the edges ragged and angry. His breathing had changed faster now, shallow, the breathing of a body beginning to fight. Briar did not hesitate. She had been preparing for moments like this since she was 12 years old. Kneeling beside her mother at a neighbor's bedside, watching those gentle hands mix poultices, brew teas, ease suffering with nothing but knowledge and patience. She sent Sage for water. She sent Colleen for firewood. And then she went to work. The mugwort went on first, crushed to paste with creek water and pressed against the wound, bound tight with strips torn from the cleanest cloth she could find in her gathering sack. Yarrow next, a handful of the fresh white flowers she had picked that very evening, steeped in the iron pot over the fire that Colleen built with her usual fierce efficiency, banging kindling against the stone until sparks caught and flame crawled up through the dry wood. The tea turned pale gold. Briar lifted the stranger's head, held the tin cup to his cracked lips. He swallowed without waking. Once. Twice. The warm liquid ran down his chin, but some went down his throat. The fever peaked somewhere in the deep hours of the night. Briar lost track of time. She knew only the rhythm: check his forehead, wring out the cloth, press it against his burning skin. Again. Again. His body shook with chills even as heat poured off him. He muttered words she could not catch. Once his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with startling strength, his eyes open but seeing something far away, something that frightened him. "I will be there," he whispered, his voice raw and cracked. "I promised. I will not run this time." "Easy now," Briar said, though she did not know who she was comforting, the stranger or herself. "I am here. You are safe." His grip loosened, his eyes closed. She changed the poultice, twice fed the fire when it burned low, sat with her back against the cot in the darkest hours when there was nothing to do but wait and listen to his labored breathing and wonder who this man was. This city man, with ink on his fingers and a letter in his valise, who had somehow ended up bleeding in their canyon. Sage sat in the corner through it all, watching with those amber eyes that missed nothing. She did not sleep. Neither did Briar. Colleen had gone back to the ranch to tend the animals, but she had left her rifle leaning by the door, just in case. Dawn came, slow gray light seeping through the cracks. The stranger's breathing had steadied some time before first light, so gradually that Briar almost did not notice. She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the change, warm, but no longer burning. The fever had broken. She let out a breath she had been holding all night. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes stung from smoke and sleeplessness. But the worst had passed. He woke with the first true light of morning. Briar was dozing against the cot, her red hair fallen across her arm, when his voice pulled her upright. "Where?" A cough, dry and rasping. "Where am I?" She blinked, straightened, found him looking at her with gray blue eyes that were clear and confused and full of a pain he was trying very hard not to show. He was taking in the room, the fire, the bandages, the strips of cloth drying on the hearthstones, the young woman with herb-stained hands sitting beside him. His spectacles sat on the table beside the cot. One lens cracked, the frame bent. Briar had found them in the rubble and set them aside. From the corner, a voice cut through the morning quiet, sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" Sage had not moved from her chair all night. She sat with her boots on the table, her amber eyes fixed on the stranger, her arms crossed over her chest. The lantern light had faded. In the gray morning, she looked like something carved from the mountain itself, small and hard, and not inclined toward mercy. The man swallowed. His throat worked. "Emmett," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Emmett Calloway, what are you doing in our canyon?" Emmett Calloway. Our canyon. The words registered somewhere behind the pain and confusion. He looked from one sister to the other, at Sage's challenging stare, at Briar's quiet watchfulness, at the herbs and bandages that told a story of hours spent keeping him alive. "I was looking for the road to Elkhorn Ranch," he said. Something changed in the cabin. A tightening of the air, the way a room changes when lightning is about to strike. Sage's boots came off the table. Briar's hands went still in her lap. "Why?" Sage asked. Emmett's mind raced. He remembered the letter, remembered the reason he had crossed a continent. But looking at these two women, wind-burned and strong, their eyes sharp with suspicion, he understood with sudden absolute clarity that saying, "I came to be your husband," would be the last sentence he ever spoke in this cabin. Maybe the last sentence he spoke anywhere, given the rifle by the door. The lie came out before he could stop it, bitter on his tongue. "I am a bookbinder, looking for work in Crestwood. I got lost on the trail." It was the first lie he had told in his 27 years of living. It tasted like dust and shame, but it was out now, loose in the world, and there was no calling it back. Sage studied him. Her eyes narrowed, measuring, weighing. Briar said nothing, but her green eyes held a question that Emmett could not meet. And that was how it began, with a man who had come to find a family lying to the only family that had ever saved his life. With 52 words in a letter sitting at the bottom of a valise in the corner, waiting like a lit fuse. Colleen arrived at noon bringing food. She came through the door like weather tall and straight-backed, her chestnut hair pulled back tight under her hat, her gray-blue eyes sweeping the cabin with the practiced assessment of a woman who managed 200 acres and two sisters and had no patience left over for anything that did not serve a purpose. She looked at Emmett the way a rancher looks at a horse she is considering not buying. Head to toe missing nothing. The wrinkled city clothes, the fine-boned hands, the ink stains, the spectacles now cracked balanced crookedly on his nose. Bookbinder, she said the word flat as a stone. Yes, ma'am. Your hands have ink, but no calluses. You have never split a log in your life. No, ma'am, I have not. You are staying here until you can walk. Then you are leaving. Are we clear, clear? She set the food on the table. Cornbread wrapped in cloth, dried venison, 3 withered apples from last autumn's store. It was not much, Emmett could see that. These women were feeding him from stores they could barely spare. Briar divided the portions. The largest piece of cornbread went to Emmett. The reasoning was practical. He was injured. He needed the strength, but the gesture was not lost on him. This woman had stayed up all night saving his life, and now she was giving him the biggest share of food she did not have enough of. Emmett looked at the cornbread in his hand. It sat there like something wholly warm from the cloth crumbling slightly at the edges. Nobody had given him the larger portion of anything since Mr. Hargrove used to split his lunch with the skinny orphan boy in the back of the bookshop. I cannot take this, Emmett said. He held the cornbread out toward Briar. You all need it more than I do. The cabin went quiet. 3 sisters looked at him, then at each other. Sage's amber eyes widened just slightly. Briar's lips parted, but no words came. And Colleen, standing by the door, turned her face away. But not before Emmett saw it, a flicker of something soft and startled in those hard gray blue eyes there, and gone so fast he might have imagined it. Nobody spoke. Briar took the cornbread back, broke it, smaller, redistributed. They ate in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, a meadowlark sang. 3 days passed. Emmett healed slowly. His ankle remained swollen, though the bruising was fading from deep purple to yellow-green at the edges. The gash on his forehead closed well under Briar's care. No spreading redness, no smell of infection. She changed the poultice twice a day, her hands moving through the motions with the certainty of long practice. And Emmett watched those hands and thought about his mother, whoever she had been, wherever she had gone. He slept and woke and slept again, drifting in and out of consciousness, the way the creek drifted past the cabin endlessly without urgency. In his waking hours, he watched the sisters move through their world. Briar came most often, bringing food, bringing medicine, bringing the quiet comfort of her presence. She did not talk much, but what she said had weight. She told him about the herbs, their names, and uses: mugwort for wounds, yarrow for fever, dock root for rashes. Her voice, when she spoke of plants, took on a music that was almost reverent, the voice of a woman who had inherited a sacred body of knowledge and carried it like a lantern through the dark. Sage came in the evenings. She was prickly and suspicious and entirely wonderful, a creature of pure kinetic energy trapped in a cabin she clearly resented. She paced. She fidgeted. She asked questions that were not really questions, but accusations disguised in upward inflections. Where exactly in Boston? What kind of books? How much does a bookbinder make? Why would a bookbinder come all the way to Montana? Emmett answered carefully, truthfully where he could, which was most places. Only the reason for his journey was a lie. Everything else, the orphanage, Mr. Hargrove, the loneliness of Boston winters, the way a well-bound book felt in your hands like a small, perfect world. All of it was true. And Sage listened with those amber eyes that missed nothing and gave away less. One evening when the fire had burned low and Briar had fallen asleep in the chair, Sage said, "Read to me." Emmett blinked. "What? You said you love books." She gestured at his valise still sitting in the corner where it had been since the first night. "Read me something." He reached for the valise, wincing as his ribs protested. The book on top was a worn copy of a collection of frontier tales. He opened it to the first page and began to read, his voice soft in the dim cabin, the words filling the small space the way warmth fills a room. Sage listened, her pacing stopped. She settled into the corner chair, drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. And for the first time since he had met her, the sharpness left her face. She looked young. She looked like what she was, a 20-year-old girl who had been forced to grow up too fast in a hard country, who had forgotten what it felt like to be read to be cared for in that small, simple way. Emmett read until the candle guttered. When he looked up, Sage was asleep, her cheek pressed against her knees, her breathing slow and even. He closed the book quietly, set it beside the bed, and in the silence he heard something. A small sound barely there. He turned toward the cabin door, which stood slightly ajar. Colleen was standing on the other side in the darkness outside. He could just make out her silhouette through the crack. She had been listening. For how long he did not know. She turned away without a word and disappeared into the night. That night, after the cabin had gone dark and quiet, after Briar had checked his bandages one final time, and Sage had retreated to whatever corner of the ranch she slept in, Emmett lay awake on the cot staring at the ceiling where moonlight made patterns through the gaps. The valise sat in the corner. Inside it, beneath the books and the tools, the letter waited. 52 words, the truth of who he was and why he had come. Every day he kept silent was another stone in the wall he was building between himself and these women who had saved his life. Tell them, said the honest part of him. Tell them now before it goes any further. But another voice, the voice of a boy who had learned young that the truth was a luxury orphans could not always afford, whispered back, not yet. They will send you away. And then you will be alone again. Truly alone. For good. Emmett closed his eyes. The creek murmured outside. The cabin walls creaked and settled in the cold mountain air. He did not sleep for a long time. And in the deepest part of the night, he did not see Sage slip through the shadows to his valise, did not hear the soft click of the clasp opening, did not know that small, quick fingers were lifting out the books one by one, reaching down to the very bottom where the letter lay folded in its envelope, did not see those amber eyes widen in the moonlight as they moved across the careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Calloway, we are three sisters managing a ranch in the Montana mountains. We need a good, honest man willing to work hard and build a life. Sage read the letter twice. Then she folded it, slipped it into the pocket of her jacket, closed the valise, and disappeared back into the shadows without a sound. The secret had changed hands, but it had not changed shape. And somewhere outside, the creek ran on cold and clear, carrying the mountain's whispered secrets down toward a world that was not yet ready to hear them. Sage Whitfield had never been good at keeping secrets. She was the sister who blurted things out at the worst possible moment, the one who told Colleen her biscuits tasted like saddle leather, the one who informed the traveling preacher that his sermon had put every soul in the congregation to sleep, including the Lord himself. Honesty was not a virtue for Sage. It was a condition like being left-handed or having amber eyes. She could not help it, but this secret she kept. She kept it through the morning when Briar brought Emmett fresh bandages and yarrow tea, kneeling beside the cot with those careful hands, her red hair catching the light from the doorway like something burning. She kept it through the afternoon when Colleen came by with a sack of dried beans and a look on her face that could have frozen the creek solid, standing in the doorway with her arms folded while Emmett thanked her in that quiet eastern voice of his. She kept it through the evening when Emmett read aloud again from his book of frontier tales, and Sage sat in her corner and watched him the way a hawk watches a rabbit, except she was no longer sure which of them was the hawk and which was the rabbit. The letter sat in her jacket pocket like a live coal. She could feel it there, warm against her ribs. 52 words that would blow this strange, fragile piece to pieces if she spoke them aloud. She did not speak them. Not yet. Instead, she watched. The first week turned into the second, and Emmett Calloway began to heal in ways that went beyond his ankle and his forehead. He moved slowly at first, a hobbling circuit from the cot to the door, and back, one hand braced against the wall for balance. But by the 8th day, he was standing unsupported, and by the 10th, he was walking not well, not gracefully, but moving under his own power with a determination that Sage found irritating and admirable in equal measure. He wanted to help. That was the thing about him that none of the sisters had expected. The men they had known, the few who had come through their lives since their father died, had been men who wanted things. The cattle buyer who had tried to cheat Colleen on prices. The drifter who had stolen a saddle from the barn. Old Hank Dawson from the neighboring spread, who came around every few months with his yet eyes and his reasonable offers to buy their land, his voice dripping with a sympathy that tasted like poison. Men wanted things. That was what Colleen had taught her sisters, and experience had confirmed it. But Emmett Calloway did not seem to want anything except to be useful, and he was spectacularly bad at it. He tried to chop wood and nearly took off his own foot. The axe handle twisted in his soft bookbinder's hands, and the blade glanced off the log and buried itself in the dirt 6 inches from his left boot. Sage, who had been watching from the porch, laughed so hard she fell off the railing. He tried to milk the cow, and the cow kicked the bucket over, then kicked Emmett over for good measure. He sat in the mud of the barn floor with milk soaking his trousers and a look of such bewildered dignity on his face that even Colleen, passing by with a feed sack, had to turn away quickly to hide something that might have been a smile. He tried to mend fence and drove the nail through the crossbar and into his own thumb. Briar bandaged it without comment, her lips pressed together in a line that could have been disapproval or could have been the effort of not laughing. But he did not stop. Every morning he was up before dawn, stumbling out of his room beneath the gable in the ranch house where Colleen had grudgingly moved him after the second week, his breath clouding in the cold mountain air. He hauled water and spilled half of it. He swept the porch and missed every corner. He tried to saddle a horse, and the horse looked at him with an expression of profound pity. And every evening when the work was done and the failures tallied, he sat at the kitchen table with the ranch ledgers spread before him, his cracked spectacles balanced on his nose, and did the one thing he was genuinely good at. He read the numbers. He checked the figures. He traced the columns of income and expense that Colleen had been maintaining in her tight, careful handwriting since their father's death. That was how he found the discrepancy. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks and 3 days since the rock slide. The kitchen was warm, the iron stove ticking with heat, the smell of coffee and pine resin filling the small room. Briar was drying herbs at the far counter, tying them in bundles with kitchen string, humming one of Mama's songs. Sage was cleaning her rifle at the other end of the table, the components spread out on an oilcloth with military precision. Colleen was at the stove, her back to the room, stirring a pot of beans with the grim focus she brought to every task. Emmett had been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. His finger traced a line of numbers, moved to another page, traced back. His brow furrowed. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on, and looked again. "Colleen," he said. Something in his voice made all three sisters look up. The quality of it had changed, the quiet politeness replaced by something harder. Something with an edge. "These cattle sales from last October. You sold 40 head to a buyer named Dawson at $12 a head." Colleen turned from the stove. "That is right. Hank Dawson. He has been buying our stock since before Daddy died." Emmett tapped the ledger. "And in November, you sold him another 30 head at the same price." "Yes." Emmett looked up. The firelight caught his spectacles, turning them into two small, bright circles. "Market price for range cattle in Montana Territory last fall was $19 a head. I saw the posted rates at the Thornfield station." He paused, letting the numbers settle into the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Dawson has been paying you $7 under market for at least a year. By my count, that is close to $900 you have been shorted." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emmett had ever heard. Briar's hands stopped moving on the herb bundles. Sage's rifle cleaning brush froze mid-stroke. Colleen stood very still by the stove, the wooden spoon motionless in her hand, her face doing something complicated and terrible. $900, Colleen repeated. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman holding something back by main force. At minimum. It could be more. Some of these entries do not have quantities listed, just lump sums. If Dawson was reporting fewer head than he actually received. Colleen set the spoon down with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. She crossed to the table, leaned over the ledger, her eyes moving across the columns with a fury that seemed to heat the air around her. Her knuckles went white on the table edge. "That son of a dog," she whispered. "It gets worse," Emmett said. He did not want to say it. He could see the rage building in Colleen like a storm front, dark and charged. But the truth was the truth, and he had already told enough lies. "There is a tax assessment here, dated 3 months ago. It claims your family owes $300 in back taxes on this property." Colleen snatched the paper from the ledger. Her eyes scanned it. "That is not right. Daddy paid every tax every year right up until the day he died. I have the receipts in the strong box. Emmett nodded. I believe you. But this assessment was filed at the county office. The paper is real. The county seal is genuine, but the entry itself. He pulled the document closer, angled it toward the lamplight. Look at the ink, here where it says $300 owing. The ink is darker than the rest of the document. Different pen, probably different hand, and the paper stock in this section does not match the paper stock of the original tax record. He looked up at Colleen. Someone has altered this document, added a debt that does not exist. Colleen's face had gone the color of bone. Who? It was not a question. They all knew the answer. But Emmett said it anyway because it needed to be said aloud, needed to exist in the room as spoken truth rather than unspoken suspicion. I think you know who. The ride to Crestwood took 4 hours by wagon. Colleen drove. Emmett sat beside her on the bench, the altered tax document in his coat pocket, the ranch ledgers stacked at his feet. They had left before dawn, the sky still more black than gray, the cold biting through their coats. They did not speak for the first hour. Colleen drove the way she did everything else with fierce concentration, her eyes fixed on the road, her hands sure on the reins. The mountains rose around them, immense and indifferent, their peaks catching the first pink light of a sun that had not yet cleared the horizon. Emmett watched the landscape and tried to remember the last time he had been this close to another person for this long without either of them saying a word. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly. It was more like a held breath, a space waiting to be filled. Tell me about Boston, Colleen said, and the words came out rough as though she had to scrape them up from somewhere deep. Emmett blinked. What would you like to know? Anything. Everything. She did not look at him. I have never been east of Billings, never seen a city bigger than Crestwood. What is it like living in a place where you cannot see the mountains? Emmett thought about it. Crowded, he said, and loud, and smaller than you would think. You can walk from one end to the other in a day, but you never see the sky. Not really, not the way you see it here. She turned the wagon around a bend. The road dropped into a valley, and suddenly the entire horizon opened up, a sweep of grass and sky so vast it made his chest hurt, with something that was not quite sadness and not quite joy. In Boston, I used to look up between the buildings and see a strip of blue about this wide. He held his thumb and finger an inch apart. I thought that was the skyline. Then I came here and realized I had been looking at the sky through a keyhole my whole life. Colleen was quiet for a moment. The wagon creaked. The horses plodded. What about your family, she asked. Never had one. Emmett kept his voice even, the way he had learned to keep it when discussing things that still had teeth. I grew up in a home for orphan boys. Place called St. Clement's, brick building, iron beds, porridge every morning. 40 boys sleeping in a room meant for 20. Colleen's hands shifted on the reins. How old were you when you went there for? Maybe younger. I do not remember anything before it. The road climbed out of the valley. Pines closed in on both sides, their branches interlocking overhead, filtering the light into shifting patterns of gold and green. The air smelled of resin and damp earth. There was a man, Emmett continued, surprising himself. He had not planned to say this. The words seemed to come of their own accord, drawn out by the privacy of the wagon seat and the strange intimacy of riding beside someone who was listening, truly listening, the way Colleen listened with her whole body turned slightly toward him, even though her eyes stayed on the road. A bookbinder named Mr. Hargrove. He took me on as an apprentice when I was 14, taught me the trade, gave me the only real home I ever had. He paused, his throat felt tight. Mr. Hargrove had a workshop on Beacon Street, smelled like glue and leather and old paper. Most people would not call that a pleasant smell, but to me it was the best smell in the world because it meant I was somewhere safe, somewhere somebody wanted me. What happened to him died last winter. Quiet, in his sleep, Emmett looked at his hands at the ink stains that never fully washed away, permanent as tattoos. He left me his tools and a note that said, "Go find your people." Colleen did not offer sympathy. She did not say the expected things. She just drove steady and silent, and after a while she said in a voice so low he almost missed it. Our daddy was like that, built a place for us out of nothing, made it safe, and then one morning he went out to fell a tree, and the tree fell on him instead. Regular morning, regular tree, and after that nothing was regular ever again. Emmett looked at her, at the hard line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the grip of her hands on the reins. He saw what he had not seen before, not stubbornness, but scaffolding. She had built herself into a structure strong enough to hold up her sisters and the ranch and the memory of her dead parents, and she had done it alone, and the cost of it was written in every rigid line of her body. He wanted to reach out, touch her hand, tell her she did not have to hold it all by herself. But he was a stranger and a liar, and he had no right to offer comfort to a woman he was deceiving, so he said nothing, and the wagon rolled on toward Crestwood in the morning light. The county clerk's office was a narrow room in the back of the Crestwood courthouse, smelling of dust and old paper and the particular despair of small-town bureaucracy. The clerk himself was a thin little man with a nervous twitch and spectacles even more battered than Emmett's. His name was Mr. Pruitt, and when Colleen Whitfield walked through his door, he turned a shade of white that Emmett had previously seen only on fresh paper stock. "Miss Whitfield," he said, his voice climbing. "What a surprise. What can I do for you today?" Colleen set the altered tax document on his desk with the deliberate precision of a woman laying down a weapon. "You can explain this." The conversation that followed was brief and devastating. Emmett stood beside Colleen and watched Mr. Pruitt's already pale face lose whatever remaining color it possessed as Emmett methodically pointed out the evidence of forgery. The mismatched ink, the different paper weight, the entry that did not appear in the original assessment rolls which Mr. Pruitt reluctantly produced from a filing cabinet after Colleen suggested in a tone that could have etched glass that he might prefer to show them voluntarily, rather than have a judge order it. It was Mr. Dawson, Pruitt said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "He came to me in March, said the Whitfield property had an old lien on it that had never been recorded, said he had documentation. He swallowed. I added the entry to the rolls. He said it was just a correction, a clerical matter." "A clerical matter," Colleen repeated. Pruitt's hands were shaking. "He told me there would be consequences if I did not cooperate. He has Miss Whitfield. He has influence in this county. Men owe him favors. I was afraid." Emmett stepped forward. He placed his hands flat on the desk, leaning in. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, his voice quiet and precise, the voice of a man who had spent years learning to be exact. "I would like you to write a sworn statement describing exactly what Mr. Dawson asked you to do and when he asked you to do it. I would also like certified copies of the original tax rolls showing no outstanding debt on the Whitfield property." "Can you do that?" Pruitt looked at Emmett, looked at Colleen, looked at the door as though hoping it might offer an escape route. Then his shoulders sagged, and he reached for pen and paper. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I can do that." On the ride back, Colleen did not speak for a long time. The certified documents sat in a leather folder on the seat between them. The sky had clouded over, and the mountains wore a crown of gray that promised rain before nightfall. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. The armor was still there, but something beneath it had shifted like a wall that had developed a crack too small to see, but large enough to change the structural integrity of the whole. "How did you know?" she asked. "About the forgery, the ink, the paper. How does a bookbinder know those things?" Emmett adjusted his cracked spectacles. "Bookbinding is about materials. You learn to read paper the way a tracker reads footprints. Age, weight, texture, the way someone ink sits on the surface versus soaking in. A good bookbinder can tell you when a document was written, what pen was used sometimes, even what time of year based on the humidity in the paper fibers." Colleen was silent for a beat. Then she said, and the words seemed to cost her something, "I was wrong about you." Emmett looked at her. The admission hung between them, solid and strange. Colleen Whitfield was not a woman who said those words easily or often. He could see what they cost her in the tightness around her eyes, the rigid set of her jaw. "You had good reason to be cautious," he said carefully. "I had reason to be cautious. I did not have reason to be cruel." "You were not cruel." Colleen looked at him, then fully turning from the road for the first time. Her gray-blue eyes were bright with something he could not name, anger, maybe, but directed inward. Shame, perhaps? Or the beginning of something that frightened her far more than Hank Dawson ever could. "You are a strange man, Emmett Calloway. So I have been told." She turned back to the road. The clouds thickened overhead. A cool wind came down from the mountains carrying the smell of rain. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of two strangers sharing a bench. It was the silence of two people who had seen something in each other and were not yet sure what to do about it. Back at the ranch, things shifted. The shift was subtle at first, the way a creek changes course not all at once, but gradually one stone at a time, until the water is flowing in a direction nobody planned. Colleen allowed Emmett to take over the ranch books entirely. She brought him a proper desk, an old roll top that had been gathering dust in the barn, and he set it up in the main room by the window where the morning light came in strong and clear. He organized the ledgers, corrected the accounts, wrote letters to cattle buyers in his neat bookbinders, hand inquiring about fair market prices. He wrote to the county seat requesting copies of every tax record pertaining to the Whitfield property for the past 10 years. He wrote to a lawyer in Helena, whose name he had found in a Crestwood newspaper, describing the situation in careful, precise terms, using the money he had saved from his bookbinding wages in Boston, his last $40, to retain the man's services. He gave the letters to Sage, who rode to the Crestwood post office twice a week for ranch supplies, and asked no questions about what he was mailing, though her amber eyes said she had her suspicions. He did all of this quietly in the evenings after the ranch work was done and the sisters had gone to their rooms. He did not tell them about the lawyer, did not tell them about the letters. He simply worked the way a bookbinder works, with patience and precision and the understanding that the most important stitches are the ones nobody sees. Briar found him one afternoon by the creek, the same stretch of bank where she gathered her herbs. He was sitting on a flat rock, with his boots off and his feet in the cold water, his journal open on his knee, sketching something. "What are you drawing?" she asked, settling onto the rock beside him. Her canvas gathering sack was already half full, the green scent of crushed herbs rising from it like incense. Emmett tilted the journal toward her. It was the yarrow plant she had taught him about, drawn in careful detail, the flat clusters of white flowers, the feathery leaves, the root system he had dug up and examined with the same methodical curiosity he brought to everything. Beside the drawing, he had written notes in his small, clear hand, Achillea millefolium, used for fever reduction, anti-inflammatory. Steep in hot water for tea, where he applied crushed leaves directly to swollen tissue. Blooms June through September along creek banks. Briar stared at the page. Nobody had ever written down what she knew. Her mother had taught her by hand and voice, the way her mother's mother had taught her. Knowledge passed like a living thing from one body to another. To see it on paper, preserved in ink and careful lines, made something catch in her throat. "You wrote down everything I told you," she said. "Every word." Emmett closed the journal, held it in his lap. "This knowledge, what you carry, it is important, Briar. More important than you know. If something happened and you could not teach it to anyone else, it would be lost. Gone forever. Like a book that burns before anyone reads it." Briar looked at him. The afternoon sun slanted through the cottonwoods, dappling the creek with light and shadow. His face was different from when he had arrived, leaner, browned by the mountain sun, the cut on his forehead now a thin pink line beneath his disheveled hair. His spectacles were still cracked, held together with a piece of wire Sage had fashioned for him. He looked like a man being slowly reshaped by the land, the soft edges wearing away to reveal something sturdier beneath. "Will you keep doing it?" she asked. "Writing it down. All of it. Everything I know. For as long as you will teach me." She taught him that afternoon and the next and the one after that. They worked their way along the creek bank, through the meadow behind the ranch, up into the lower pine forest, where different plants grew in the shade and the damp. Briar named them, and Emmett drew them his pencil, moving with a sure hand that surprised her, the bookbinder's eye for detail, translating perfectly to botanical illustration. She taught him comfrey for bone healing, the broad fuzzy leaves that grew in clumps near the spring house. She taught him elderberry for winter colds, the dark clusters of berries that Mama used to boil into a syrup so sweet and thick it tasted like medicine pretending to be candy. She taught him wild chamomile for sleeplessness, the tiny daisy-like flowers that she dried on racks in the kitchen and steeped in hot water on the nights when grief kept her awake. And in the teaching, something opened in her that had been closed since her mother's death. The knowledge was not just information. It was connection, a thread stretching back through generations of women who had watched and learned and passed down what they knew. Each plant she named for Emmett was a small act of resurrection, her mother's voice speaking through her hands, alive again in the space between them. Emmett listened the way no man had ever listened to her, not with half attention, not waiting for his turn to speak, but with his entire being focused on what she was saying, his pencil moving his questions, proving that he understood not just the facts, but the meaning beneath them. And when she told him about her mother, about the 3 months of coughing, and the morning she finally stopped, Emmett did not offer empty comfort. He simply closed his journal and said, "Tell me about her hands. What you said you miss her hands. Tell me about them." And Briar did. She told him about her mother's hands, small and quick, and always warm hands that could deliver a calf-baked cornbread, crush herbs into healing paste, and hold a frightened child through a thunderstorm, all in the same day. She talked until the sun dropped behind the mountain and the first stars appeared above the pines. And when she finally stopped, her face was wet with tears she had not known she was shedding. Emmett reached into his pocket and produced a clean handkerchief, one of the last remnants of his Boston life, pressed and folded with the precision of a man who had very few nice things and took care of each one. He held it out to her without a word. Their fingers touched when she took it, brief and warm and electric. Briar pulled away quickly, wiping her eyes, and stood up. "We should get back," she said, "before dark." They walked back to the ranch in silence, and neither of them mentioned the way the air had changed between them, charged and humming like the space before a lightning strike. But Sage noticed. Sage noticed everything. The confrontation came on a Tuesday night, 11 days after Sage had found the letter. She had given Emmett 2 weeks. 2 weeks had passed. He had not spoken. She found him in his room beneath the gable, sitting at the old desk by the window, writing in his journal by candlelight. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her arms crossed. "Time is up," she said. Emmett's pen stopped. He did not look up. Sage reached into her jacket pocket and laid the letter on his desk. The same letter, the same 52 words, now slightly wrinkled from being carried against her body for 2 weeks. "I know who you are, Emmett Calloway. I have known since the second night. You are the mail-order husband my sister sent for." Emmett set down his pen. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly on his shirt, put them back on. His hands were trembling. When he finally looked at Sage, his eyes were the color of creek water. On a cloudy day, gray-blue and deep and full of currents, she could not read. "Yes," he said. "You lied to us, to all of us. For a month, yes." Sage's jaw tightened. She pushed off the door, began to pace 3 steps. One way, 3 steps back, the room too small for the energy she was burning. "Briar sits beside you every day. She teaches you everything she knows. She thinks you are her friend. She trusts you, Emmett. Do you understand what that means? She does not trust anyone. Not since Mama died. You are the first person in 5 years she has let in, and you are lying to her face." The words hit Emmett like stones, each one landing in a place that was already bruised. "I know," he said. "Then why did you not tell them?" Emmett stood. The candle flame jumped and steadied. He walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. Somewhere below, the creek murmured its endless conversation with the stones. "Because when I woke up in that cabin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I saw 3 women who were the strongest people I had ever met, who had built a life out of nothing but stubbornness and love. And I thought if I told them that I was the husband they had sent for the bookbinder from Boston, who cannot chop wood or ride a horse or do anything useful on a ranch, they would laugh me off the mountain." He paused. "And they would be right to." Sage stopped pacing. She stood still, her amber eyes fixed on his face. "That is not your decision to make. I know, you have one more chance. Tomorrow morning. You tell them or I do." Emmett turned from the window. "And if they send me away—" Sage looked at him for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that was softer than he had ever heard from her, "Then at least you will leave as an honest man instead of a comfortable liar. And believe me, Emmett, in this family we have had enough liars to last us a lifetime." She took the letter from the desk, pressed it into his hand, closed his fingers around it. "Tell them, in the morning." Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. Emmett stood alone in the candlelight, the letter in his hand, 52 words that had brought him 1,000 miles and were about to either build a home or burn one down. The storm that hit Elkhorn Ranch that night was the worst the sisters could remember since the winter their father died. It came without warning, a wall of black cloud that swallowed the stars and turned the world to chaos. Rain fell in sheets so thick the barn disappeared from view. Wind tore at the roof shingles and howled through every crack in the walls. Emmett was in the kitchen when the first crack of lightning split the sky, and then everything happened at once. The cattle, Colleen shouted from the back door, already pulling on her oilskin coat. The lower pasture will flood. We have to move them to high ground. All four of them ran into the storm. The rain was not rain, but a solid wall of water that hit Emmett's face like a fist. Within seconds, he was soaked through, blinded, gasping. The ground had turned to black mud that sucked at his boots with every step. Sage and Colleen took the far end of the pasture. Briar and Emmett took the near end. The cattle were panicking, dark shapes milling and bellowing in the lightning flashes, their eyes white with terror. Emmett had never worked cattle in his life. He did not know what he was doing. But Briar was beside him, shouting instructions through the rain, and he followed her voice the way a drowning man follows a rope. They drove the cattle uphill through the mud, through the rain, through a darkness lit only by lightning that froze the world into stark white photographs. Emmett fell twice. The second time he went down face first in mud, so deep it filled his mouth and nose, and for one horrible moment he could not breathe, could not see, could not find which way was up. Then Briar's hand was on his collar, hauling him upright, and her face was inches from his streaming, water fierce and alive. "Get up!" she shouted over the thunder. "You do not get to quit now." He got up. He got up because she told him to, because her hand was on his arm and her voice was in his ears, and in that moment, she was the only fixed point in a world that had dissolved into mud and darkness and noise. The tree fell at the worst possible moment. A massive pine at the edge of the pasture, its roots undermined by the flooding creek, gave way with a crack that sounded like the earth breaking open. Emmett saw it coming in a flash of lightning, the dark shape tilting toward them with terrible slow grace. Briar had her back to it. She did not see. He did not think. There was no time for thinking. There was only the physics of the thing, the falling tree, Briar in its path, and his own body in between. He hit her at a dead run, his arms wrapping around her waist, driving them both sideways into the mud as the tree came down behind them, with an impact that shook the ground and sent a spray of mud and bark and broken branches across their backs. They lay in the mud, Emmett on top of Briar, the breath knocked out of both of them. The tree had missed them by less than a foot. Its branches scraped against Emmett's boot heels. In the next flash of lightning, Briar looked up at him. Her face was inches from his, streaked with mud and rain, her green eyes enormous, her lips parted. And in her eyes, Emmett saw something that pierced through the storm and the cold and the fear. Something raw and unguarded that she would never have shown him in daylight, in calm weather, in any world where she had time to build her walls back up. Why she whispered, and the word was barely audible above the storm. Emmett pushed himself up off her, rolled to the side. His ribs ached where he had hit the ground. His face was cut. He could feel the blood mixing with rain and mud on his cheek. His spectacles were gone again somewhere in the muck. "Because you were in the way," he said, and the words came out shaking, not with cold, but with everything he was fighting not to say. "And I was there. It is not more complicated than that." Briar stared at him, and in the lightning's white flash, he saw her recognize the words. Her own words, the ones she had spoken to Sage that first night in the cabin, when Sage had asked why Briar had stayed with the injured stranger instead of riding for help. "Because he was hurt, and I was there. It is not more complicated than that." Her expression changed. Something cracked open behind those green eyes, and Emmett saw it happen the moment she understood that he had been listening. Really listening from the very beginning. That her words had mattered to him. That she mattered to him. She opened her mouth to speak, but the thunder crashed again, and Colleen was shouting from somewhere in the darkness, and the moment broke apart like water on rocks. They finished moving the cattle. It took another hour. By the time they stumbled back to the house, all four of them were so exhausted they could barely stand. Sage had a gash on her forearm from a flying branch. Colleen's hat was gone, her hair plastered to her skull. Emmett could barely see without his spectacles, and Briar kept one hand on his elbow, guiding him up the porch steps. Inside, they stood dripping on the kitchen floor, catching their breath. The fire in the stove had gone out. The house was cold and dark. Emmett looked at the three sisters, mud-streaked and exhausted and more beautiful than anything he had ever seen, these three women who had dragged a mountain and a ranch and each other through another crisis by sheer force of will. He looked at them, and he knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought, deeper than bone, that he could not wait until morning. He reached into his coat pocket. The letter was still there, wet and mud-stained, but intact, 52 words that had survived 1,000 miles in a rock slide in a storm. He pulled it out, unfolded it with shaking hands. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. Three pairs of eyes fixed on him. Gray, blue, forest green, amber. "I am not a bookbinder looking for work." He set the letter on the kitchen table, its paper dark with water, the ink blurring but still legible. "I mean, I am a bookbinder, but that is not why I came to Montana." He pushed the letter toward Colleen. "I came because of this." Colleen picked up the letter. "Read it." Her face went white, then red, then a shade that had no name, a color that existed only in the space between fury and despair. "This is my letter," she said. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled, the voice of a woman standing at the edge of something and choosing not to fall. "I wrote this. You did. 6 months ago. I put it in a newspaper in St. Louis. Then I regretted it. I thought no one had answered. I answered," Emmett said, "and I came. And when I woke up in that cabin with your sister's hands on my wounds, I was too much of a coward to tell you the truth." The silence that followed was absolute. The rain drummed on the roof. Water dripped from their clothes onto the plank floor. The wind pushed at the windows. Colleen set the letter down. She looked at Briar, who was standing very still by the stove, her face unreadable. She looked at Sage, who stood with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, watching, waiting. She looked at Emmett. "Get out," she said. Emmett did not argue. He did not explain. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the rain. Behind him, the door closed. And then there was nothing but the storm and the darkness and the certainty that he had just lost the only people who had ever felt like home. Emmett Calloway stood on the porch of the Whitfield Ranch house in the pouring rain, and he did not move. He had nowhere to go. That was the simple truth of it. The night was black as the inside of a coffin. The rain was still coming down in sheets so thick he could not see past the porch rail. The trail down to Crestwood would be a river of mud by now, impassable in the dark. And even if he could find it, he had no horse, no spectacles, no light, and an ankle that still ached in wet weather like a tooth with a bad nerve. But that was not why he stayed. He stayed because the door behind him was the door to the only place that had ever felt like home, and leaving it was something his body simply refused to do, the way a heart refuses to stop beating, even when the mind has given up on reasons to continue. So he stood. The rain plastered his hair to his skull. It ran down his face in streams, washing away the mud and the blood from the cut on his cheek. It soaked through his coat, his shirt, his undershirt, all the way down to skin, and the cold sank in after it, deep and thorough, settling into his bones like a tenant with no intention of leaving. He heard voices through the door, raised voices. Three of them braided together in the way that only sisters' voices can braid a harmony even in anger. He could not make out words, only tones. Colleen's voice was a blade sharp and flat. Briar's was lower, steadier, the voice of someone trying to hold a crumbling wall together with her hands. And Sage's voice cut through both of them, bright and fierce, the youngest refusing to be drowned out. He pressed his back against the wall beside the door and slid down until he was sitting on the porch boards, his knees drawn up, his arms wrapped around them. The rain blew sideways under the porch roof, wetting him from the side. He did not care. He deserved worse than rain. He deserved exactly what he had gotten: a closed door and the sound of three women he had lied to arguing about what to do with him. Inside the kitchen, Colleen Whitfield was not arguing. She was demolishing. A month. She paced the kitchen in her muddy boots, each step leaving a dark print on the floor, her wet hair sending rivulets of water down the back of her oilskin. He has been lying to us for a month, sitting at our table, eating our food, sleeping under our roof. And the entire time he knew. He knew who he was and why he was here, and he said nothing. Briar stood by the stove, her hands gripping the iron railing that ran along its edge. Her knuckles were white. Her face was the color of the ashes in the cold firebox. She had not spoken since Emmett walked out the door. She was not sure she could speak. Something was jammed sideways in her throat, something too big for words, a feeling she could not name because she had never felt it before, this particular combination of betrayal and understanding, and a third thing she was not ready to examine. Colleen turned on her. "Did you know?" "No." The word came out hoarse. "No, Colleen, I did not know. He sat with you by the creek every day. You taught him everything Mama taught you. You let him into your life, Briar. And he was lying to her face. Briar's chin lifted. I know what he did. You do not have to list it for me. Then how can you stand there looking like you might defend him because he pushed me out of the way of a falling tree 2 hours ago? Briar's voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting for control. Because he spent $40 of his own money, the only money he had, hiring a lawyer to save our land. Because he sat up in that room every night after we went to bed, writing letters and checking records, and doing everything he could to protect us from Hank Dawson, and he never said a word about it. He never asked for thanks. He never asked for anything. He asked for our trust, Colleen shot back, and he did not deserve it. The kitchen went quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Rain hammered the windows. From the corner by the door, Sage spoke. Her voice was calm, measured. The voice of the youngest sister who had spent her whole life watching the other two fight and had learned that the best way to be heard was to wait until the shouting stopped. I knew, Sage said. Both sisters turned. Colleen's face went rigid. Briar's eyes widened. Sage leaned against the door frame, one hand gripping the wood. I found the letter in his valise the second night. I have been carrying it in my pocket for 2 weeks. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. Heavier, more dangerous. Colleen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. It was flat now, toneless, the voice of a woman who had been hit so many times she had stopped flinching. You knew, Colleen said, and you said nothing. I gave him a chance to tell you himself. 2 weeks. He ran out of time tonight. What? The word came out broken. Why would you keep that from me? Sage pushed off the door frame and walked toward her oldest sister. She stopped an arm's length away and looked up into Colleen's face, and for a moment the age difference between them collapsed. They were not 20 and 28. They were just two women standing in a cold kitchen on a terrible night trying to figure out what was true. Because you would have thrown him out before he had a chance to show us who he really is, Sage said. And who he really is, Colleen, who he really is, has nothing to do with that letter. I have watched him every single day. I have watched him fail at chopping wood and get up and try again. I have watched him study the ranch books until his eyes crossed because he wanted to make sure nobody was cheating us. I have watched him read stories to me in the evenings like I was worth his time, like my mind mattered, like I was not just the wild little sister everybody ignores. Her voice wavered. She steadied it, and I watched him throw himself in front of a falling tree to save Briar. Not because he had to, not because it would win him anything, because she was in danger and he was there, and that is who he is. Sage looked at Briar, looked back at Colleen. He is a liar. Yes, he is also the best man who has ever set foot on this ranch, and that includes every man in Crestwood and Hank Dawson, and every drifter who ever passed through here with his hat in his hand and his eyes on what he could take. The kitchen was very still. The rain had softened to a steady drum. Water dripped from the ceiling in the corner, where the roof leaked a soft, rhythmic plinking into the bucket they kept there for that purpose. Colleen walked to the table. She picked up the letter, now wrinkled, and water stained the ink running in places. She read it again. Her own words written 6 months ago in a moment of weakness, she had regretted every day since a moment when the loneliness had gotten too heavy, and she had done the one thing she swore she would never do. She had asked for help. I wrote this letter at 2 in the morning, she said. Her voice was barely audible. It was February. Snow was so deep I could not open the barn door. A pipe had burst in the kitchen. Sage had a fever. The cattle needed feeding and the hay was running low, and I had been awake for 3 days straight. She set the letter down. I was sitting right here at this table, and I thought I cannot do this alone anymore. So I wrote to a newspaper in St. Louis and asked for a husband the way someone might ask for a hired hand. She looked at her sisters, and then morning came and the snow melted a little, and I fixed the pipe and Sage got better, and I thought, what have I done? I never told either of you because I was ashamed that I was weak, ashamed that I needed someone. You are not weak, Briar said quietly. Colleen's laugh was short and sharp and held no humor. I have been so busy being strong that I forgot what it feels like to let someone in. And now this man, this bookbinder from Boston who cannot chop a log to save his life, walks in here and in 4 weeks does what I have been too proud and too scared to do for 2 years. He asked for help. He offered help. He saw what needed doing, and he did it. She pressed her palms flat on the table, leaned on them. The weight of the ranch, the weight of her father's memory, the weight of 2 years of doing everything alone settled visibly on her shoulders. He lied, she said, and I am not sure I can forgive that. Nobody is asking you to forgive it tonight, Sage said. Then what are you asking? Sage nodded toward the front door. The rain had eased. Through the window they could see a shape on the porch, a man sitting with his back to the wall, his knees drawn up, his head bowed. He had not moved. He had not left. I am asking you to let him stay, Sage said. Not as a husband, not as anything with a name, just as someone who wants to be here. Someone who chose to stay even when you told him to go. Colleen looked at the shape on the porch. Looked at Briar, whose green eyes were bright with something she was holding back by main force. Looked at Sage, who stood with her chin lifted and her arms at her sides, no longer the wild little sister, but a young woman who had made a choice and was standing behind it. She went to the door. Emmett heard the door open behind him. He did not look up. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the sky to the east was beginning to show the faintest suggestion of gray dawn, still an hour away, but making its intentions known. He was shivering, his teeth chattered, his fingers had gone numb in his lap. Get up, Colleen's voice, hard, flat, giving nothing away. He got up. It took effort. His legs had stiffened, his bad ankle protesting with a sharp, bright pain that climbed up through his calf. He braced himself against the wall and turned to face her. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the soft glow of the lamp Briar had lit inside. Her face was in shadow, unreadable. Behind her he could see the kitchen, the table, the two other sisters standing very still watching. The cornbread, Colleen said. Emmett blinked. Water ran into his eyes. He wiped his face with a numb hand. I do not understand. The first week. Briar divided the food and gave you the biggest piece. You pushed it back. Said we needed it more. Her voice changed on the last word, developed a hairline fracture that she tried to hide and could not. Nobody has done that since our father. Nobody has put us first in 2 years. Emmett said nothing. There was nothing to say. You lied to us. Colleen's voice steadied, found its iron again. You came into our home under false pretenses. You let my sister trust you while hiding who you were. I am not sure I will ever fully forgive that. She stepped to the side, clearing the doorway. But you can come inside. Emmett stared at her. The lamplight fell on one half of his face. Rain dripped from his hair, from his chin, from the fingers that hung at his sides. He looked at the open door, at the warm light beyond it, at the three women who stood inside watching him, with eyes that held anger and hurt and something else, something that he recognized because he felt it too, a wild, impossible hope that he did not dare name. I do not deserve this, he said. No, Colleen agreed, you do not. She held his gaze, and in her gray-blue eyes, he saw the cost of what she was doing, the walls she was choosing to leave, crack the risks she was choosing to take. But deserving has never been the point. Emmett stepped through the door. The warmth of the kitchen hit him like a wave, and he stood there dripping on the floor, unable to stop shivering, unable to speak. Briar moved first. She crossed the kitchen and took his frozen hands between her warm ones, the same hands that had dressed his wounds, the same hands that had held the herbs in the knowledge and the memory of her mother. She held his hands and looked up at him, and he saw it in her eyes, the hurt. Yes, the betrayal, yes, but also the understanding. She knew about lies told out of fear. She knew about the terror of being vulnerable in front of people who could destroy you. She knew because she had lived it every day since her mother died. The lie of being fine, the lie of not needing anyone, the lie of pretending that knowledge and competence could fill the space where love was supposed to be. You are freezing, Briar said. And that was all she said. But her hands were warm and she did not let go. Sage appeared with a blanket, the good wool one from the chest in the hallway, and draped it over his shoulders without ceremony. She gave him a look that said, I told you so, and also you are an idiot, and also welcome home. And then she went to the stove and began building a fire with the efficiency of a woman who had been keeping things alive her whole life. Colleen stood apart. She did not touch him. She did not offer comfort. She leaned against the kitchen door frame and watched. In her face was a country Emmett could not yet read, all mountains and shadows and distances he had not earned the right to cross. But she had opened the door. That was enough. That was more than enough. They sat at the kitchen table as the fire caught and the stove began to tick with heat. Sage made coffee strong and black and poured 4 cups. They wrapped their hands around the warmth and sat in the lamplight while the storm died outside and the first gray light of dawn crept across the floor. Emmett told them everything. He started from the beginning, from Street Clement's orphanage, in the iron beds in the cold Boston winters. From Mr. Hargrove in the bookshop on Beacon Street and the smell of glue and leather that meant safety. From the old man's death and the note that said, "Go find your people." From the day he saw the advertisement in the St. Louis paper and felt something break open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 23 years. He told them about the train ride, the longest journey of his life, watching the country change outside the window from brick and cobblestone to farmland to grassland to mountains, each mile taking him further from everything he knew and closer to something he could not name. He told them about stepping off at Thornfield Station with his heart hammering so loud he was sure the station master could hear it, about the moment he realized nobody was coming, about the decision to walk into the canyon alone because he had come too far to turn back. He told them about waking up in the cabin with Briar's hands on his wounds and Sage's eyes on his face, about the lie that came out before he could stop it, about the shame that had sat in his stomach like a stone every day since. "I have never lied before," he said. "Not once in 27 years. I need you to believe that, even if you cannot believe anything else I say. I have never lied, and I will never lie to you again." The kitchen was very quiet when he finished. The fire crackled in the stove. The coffee had gone cold in their cups. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, and the first birds were beginning to sing tentative and scattered, testing the new silence. "You wrote to a lawyer," Colleen said. She said it the way she might have said, "You robbed a bank flat," and factual, as though she were still assembling the evidence. "With your own money, your last $40. "It was necessary," Emmett said. "Dawson is not going to stop. He wants this land." The forged tax record was just the beginning. "How do you know?" "Because I have read enough books to know how this story goes. The man with money and influence does not give up after one failed attempt. He comes back with something bigger." A lawyer levels the field. Colleen studied him. He could see her mind working behind those storm-colored eyes, weighing the ledger of his deeds against his lies, trying to find the balance. "You had $40. You spent it all on a lawyer for a ranch that is not yours, for people who are not your family." Emmett looked at his hands, at the ink stains, at the calluses that had begun to form over the past month, new and tender earned. "You are the closest thing to family I have ever had," he said. "And this ranch is the closest thing to home. I know I have not earned the right to say that, but it is the truth." Another silence. The clock ticked. A rooster crowed somewhere outside, confused by the strange gray light. Briar spoke on. Her voice was soft, but it carried in the quiet kitchen the way a clear note carries in an empty hall. "Mama used to say that the measure of a person shows when nobody is watching, when there is nothing to gain." She looked at Emmett. "You sat up every night working to save our land. You never told us. You never asked for credit. You never expected to be thanked." She set her coffee cup down. "That is not the behavior of a liar. That is the behavior of a man who made a mistake and spent every waking hour trying to make it right." Colleen looked at Briar, looked at Sage, who sat with her chin in her hand, watching the conversation with the alert patience of a hawk on a fence post. Looked at Emmett, wet and shivering and ridiculous in his ruined city clothes, sitting at their kitchen table as though he belonged there. "I do not forgive you," Colleen said. The words were deliberate, each one placed like a stone in a wall. "Not yet, maybe not for a long time." She uncrossed her arms. "But the room under the gable is yours, for now, and we will see." Emmett let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Thank you. Do not thank me. Earn it, I will." "And Emmett," Colleen's voice stopped him as he reached for the coffee pot to pour a fresh cup. "If you ever lie to me again about anything, even the weather, I will put you on the next train east myself, and I will not be gentle about it." Emmett met her eyes, understood. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Emmett's life and the best. He worked. Lord, how he worked. He rose before dawn and fell into bed after dark, his body aching in places he did not know could ache, his hands blistered and bleeding, and slowly toughening into something that could grip an axe handle without flinching. He learned to chop wood. He learned to mend fence properly, the post straight, the wire taut. He learned to saddle a horse, to ride without falling, to sit a canter without bouncing like a sack of potatoes, though this last one took considerably longer than the others. He kept the books. He corresponded with the lawyer in Helena, who wrote back with encouraging news. The case against Dawson was building. The forged tax record, the underpayment for cattle, the intimidation of the county clerk. It was not enough yet for a criminal prosecution, the lawyer said, but it was enough to file a civil complaint, enough to make Dawson think twice. And he wrote. Every evening after the ranch work was done, he sat at the roll-top desk by the window and worked on the book he had begun that first afternoon by the creek. Not a book he was binding, a book he was making. Briar's book. Every herb, every remedy, every piece of knowledge she had shared with him, drawn in careful detail and annotated in his clear hand. Comfrey and yarrow and mugwort and dockroot and wild chamomile and elderberry and 50 more plants he had learned to identify by sight and smell and touch. He was binding it himself, of course, cutting the pages, folding the signatures, stitching them together with linen thread, the way Mr. Hargrove had taught him, each stitch precise, each knot tight. The cover was deerskin tanned by sage, soft and warm to the touch. On the spine he had tooled 3 letters in gold, RWWW, Ruth Whitfield's Wisdom. He did not tell Briar about the book. It was the one secret he kept, and this one he kept not out of cowardice but out of love, though he was not yet brave enough to call it that. Hank Dawson came back one final time on a September afternoon, the air crisp with the first suggestion of autumn, the aspens on the high slopes beginning to turn gold. He came with 2 men who wore badges and carried papers, men from the territorial marshal's office, who had been summoned not by Dawson but by the lawyer in Helena, acting on evidence compiled by a bookbinder from Boston who knew how to read paper the way a tracker reads the ground. Emmett stood on the porch beside Colleen and watched the marshals serve Hank Dawson with a civil complaint and a restraining order that barred him from the Whitfield property. He watched Dawson's face go through a series of colors, white to red to purple, watched the older man's eyes flick to Emmett, and register finally that the thin young man with the cracked spectacles was not what he appeared to be. Dawson's face twisted. He looked at the marshals, looked at the papers in their hands, looked back at Emmett. For a moment, something dangerous moved behind his eyes, the calculation of a man weighing whether violence might still salvage what cunning had lost. Then the lead marshal shifted his weight, and his hand moved to rest on the butt of his revolver, casual but unmistakable. The calculation died. Dawson gathered his reins with stiff fingers. "You will regret this," he said, but the words had no teeth. They were the words of a man who had already lost and knew it. He mounted and rode out without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves hung in the September air for a long time after he was gone, golden and slow in the afternoon light, and then the wind took it and scattered it across the valley, and it was as if he had never been there at all. Colleen turned to Emmett. He stood beside her on the porch, his hands in his pockets, squinting against the sun because his spectacles were still held together with Sage's wire and he had never gotten around to replacing them. She did not say thank you. That was not Colleen's way. She said, "You need new spectacles." "I do. I will take you to Crestwood on Saturday. There is an optician on Main Street." "That would be kind." She nodded, went inside. But at the door she paused, and without turning around, she said in a voice so low he almost missed it, "You have earned the right to stay, Emmett. Not for the lawyer or the books or any of that." She turned her head just enough for him to see her profile, the strong jaw, the high cheekbone, the lashes dark against her skin. "For the cornbread, for the tree, Mom, for every morning you got up and tried again when any sensible man would have quit." She went inside and closed the door, and Emmett stood on the porch alone, and he was crying, and he did not care because, for the first time in 27 years, somebody had told him he had earned the right to stay. The evening came on slow and golden, the way September evenings do in Montana, the light thickening like honey, the shadows stretching long across the pastures. The cattle moved in quiet clusters toward the creek, their bells making a soft, irregular music. The mountains stood against the sky like sentinels, their peaks touched with the first pink of sunset. 4 people sat on the porch of the Whitfield ranch house. Colleen sat in her father's old chair, the one with the worn armrests and the squeak in the left rocker. She held a cup of coffee in both hands and watched the sunset with an expression that was not quite peaceful, but was closer to peace than she had been in 2 years. She sat with her shoulders down for the first time Emmett had known her, the scaffolding still there but no longer bearing the full weight alone. Briar sat on the top step, her knees drawn up, her red hair loose on her shoulders. Beside her, leaning against the porch post, was the book Emmett had given her that morning. Wrapped in brown paper, the deerskin cover, soft to the touch, the gold letters gleaming on the spine. She had opened it, and she had seen her mother's knowledge preserved on every page. The drawings, the annotations, the careful love that had gone into each stitch and each letter. She had looked up at Emmett with those green eyes full of something that spilled down her cheeks before she could stop it, and she had said simply, "You kept her alive." And Emmett had said, "She was never gone. She was in your hands the whole time." Sage sat on the porch railing, her boots dangling, a book open in her lap. One of Emmett's books, the frontier tales she had fallen asleep to on those first nights in the cabin. She was not reading it now. She was watching the sunset and stealing glances at the man who sat in the chair beside Colleen's, the old ladderback that had been empty since their father died. Emmett sat in the chair. His hands rested on the armrests, and they were different hands now than the ones that had arrived at Thornfield Station in June. They were still a bookbinder's hands. The ink stains would never fully fade, but they had calluses, now honest ones earned from fence wire and axe handles and creek water and the rough bark of fallen trees. They were hands that had learned to hold a life together, not just a book. He looked at the sunset. The sky was doing things he had no words for, colors that existed only in this place, this hour, this slant of mountain light. Orange melting into rose, pink deepening to violet. A band of gold along the horizon, so pure and bright it hurt to look at, and above it the first star of evening, singular and steady. In Boston, he said quietly, "I never saw the sunset. The buildings were in the way." Sage looked up from her book. "Here we see it every night and forget to look." "I will never forget to look," Emmett said. The silence that settled over the porch was not the silence of strangers or the silence of people who have run out of things to say. It was the silence of people who have said the hard things and survived them, who have chosen to stay in the same room even when leaving would have been easier. The silence of a family being born. Colleen spoke without looking at him. "There is a section of fence on the North Ridge that needs rebuilding before winter. It is a two-person job." "I will be up at dawn," Emmett said. "I know you will," and that was it. No grand declaration, no dramatic reconciliation, just a woman telling a man about a fence that needed mending, and a man saying he would be there in the morning, and both of them knowing that the fence was not really about the fence. Briar closed the book in her lap, running her fingers over the deerskin cover one last time. She looked at Emmett, and something passed between them that did not need words, a recognition, an understanding, a promise that had been written in herb-stained hands and careful drawings and nights spent by the creek talking about plants and mothers and the things that matter. The last light faded. The stars came out, scattered across the Montana sky like seeds waiting to grow. The mountains darkened to silhouettes against the deep blue, massive and patient, older than memory, older than grief, old enough to know that the things worth having always take time. My grandmother used to say that the truest measure of a person shows itself when nobody is watching, when there is nothing to gain, when the only witness is your own conscience and the good Lord above. Emmett Calloway traveled 1,000 miles on the strength of 52 words and found something no letter could have promised him. 3 sisters who held a mountain together with nothing but stubborn love, who taught him that family is not something you are born into, but something you build one honest day at a time with blistered hands and a willing heart. He was not forgiven right away. Colleen's trust came in inches, not miles, parceled out like provisions on a long winter, each piece earned with labor and patience and the quiet daily proof of a man who said he would stay and meant it. Briar's trust came differently in the language of herbs and drawings, in a book that smelled of deerskin and love. And Sage's trust, the youngest and the wildest, had been given first and given freely, the way only someone who has not yet learned to be afraid can give it. He was not the husband they expected. He was something better. He was the man who showed up, who failed and kept trying, who lied and told the truth, who spent his last $40 on a lawyer for people who were not yet his family, and then earned the right to call them that one fence post, one chopped log, one cold morning at a time. Maybe that is what we are all looking for when you get right down to it. Not someone perfect. Not someone who never makes mistakes. Just someone who sees us for who we are, stays anyway, and gets up every morning willing to try again. If you found something familiar in these pages, something that reminded you of your own road toward trust and belonging, then this story did its work. Thank you kindly for walking this path with me.